Prophecy Club? Do you think things just take their normal course of action, or do you think that there are people in high places that try to stack the deck to their advantage? Do you think that no one tries to hide a card, or no one is slipping information under the table? Or do you believe that there really is a group of people in high places that work together around the globe to do evil things? In other words, do you believe that history just happens the way it happens, or do you think that there are some people behind the curtain that push the buttons and pull the strings to their advantage? If there is a group of people that can and do rule the world, who are they? What is their name? When were they formed? And how do we know for certain that this is all true? To answer that question, I invited Dr. Stan Monteith to come in and make an awesome DVD. People love this DVD. It's called Secrets of the Illuminati. He spent 37 years studying the Illuminati. He tells you all about the history of this conspiracy, including the Federal Reserve, Rhodes Scholar, the Jesuits, Lucius Trust, the Masons, Skull and Bones, the Rosicrucians, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderbergers, and a whole lot more. Now let's go listen to the audio from the DVD Secrets of the Illuminati by Dr. Stan Monteith.
But there are a couple of interesting things about Henry Ford. One is that Henry Ford built up Hitler's military potential, and there were Ford motor plants operating in Germany both before and during the Second World War, providing the war materials for Adolf Hitler. Henry Ford was given the highest award any civilian could be given by the Nazi government. But what most people never stop and think about is that Henry Ford also built the Gorky truck plant and car plant in Russia, in communist Russia. He put Russia on wheels. And during the Vietnam War, I've been told that many of the flyers, seeing the trucks driving down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, carrying the weapons that would be used to kill American boys in South Vietnam, those trucks looked very much like Ford motor trucks. And they looked like Ford motor trucks because they were Ford motor trucks. They were built by the Ford plant at Gorky with technology that had been transferred from America by the Ford company. Then, of course, there are the writings of Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill has always had a good press, or almost always had a good press, and yet during the 1920s in the London Times, he wrote a great deal of anti-Semitic material claiming that the Bolshevik Revolution was entirely a Zionist revolution, pointing to the Jews as being responsible for all the troubles of Europe, troubles that threatened to spread to the West. Winston Churchill, you remember we talked about in our opening remarks. He thought that those lines of Tennyson were the most noble ever written. You remember, the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. And Winston Churchill, to understand what's going on today is to understand Winston Churchill. Most of you who've probably never studied the history of the First World War don't remember Gallipoli. But Gallipoli was in Asia Minor, and Winston Churchill was the Lord of the Admiralty of Great Britain, and he ordered an attack on Gallipoli. Now, it was a strip of land adjacent to the mountains, and had the British Expeditionary Force ever gotten off the beaches, they never could have done anything because there was nothing behind them but mountains. You could never have gotten through them. And yet, he ordered this. The men were put ashore. 150,000 British soldiers died or were wounded at Gallipoli. 150,000 Turks were wounded at Gallipoli. A senseless slaughter of human life, and many people for some years after the First World War remembered that was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had insisted on it, one of the great military disasters of all time. One of the people I really enjoyed meeting in my 37 years I've been involved in researching what's going on was General Albert Wedemeyer. General Wedemeyer was a four-star Marine general. Perhaps some of you remember that wonderful docudrama, Herman Wouk's The Winds of War. How many of you remember that? Basically, it was a story about an American general played by Robert Mitchum who was going to the White House to have dinner with Churchill and FDR. That, in real life, was General Albert Wedemeyer. He was the chief planner for the American military, for the American Army, in the years leading up to and at the beginning of the Second World War. And I spent several weekends with him, a great deal of time. And one of the things he pointed out was that Winston Churchill had insisted in 1943, in early 1943, we were ready to end the war. We had the men, we had the material, and General Wetty wanted to attack the enemy. That was Germany. Winston Churchill didn't want to attack the enemy. He wanted to attack North Africa. And, of course, they had a marked disagreement over this, and Winston Churchill prevailed upon Roosevelt to send General Wetty off to India to be banished because he wouldn't go along with the idea of invading North Africa, which accomplished absolutely nothing other than to kill a lot of people, bypass North Africa, go after the enemy. And then after we attacked North Africa, we attacked Sicily. And then after we attacked Sicily, we attacked Anzio. And then we fought up the little narrow boot of Italy where we could never possibly make a breakout, losing, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men. The interesting thing, we lost more men at the invasion of Anzio than General MacArthur lost in all of the invasions of all of the islands in the South Pacific. Why didn't Churchill want to end the war? Why did he insist on the bloodletting at Gallipoli and in North Africa? Why didn't he end the war? Well, before the evening is over, of course, we'll give you the answers to that. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. I don't know how many of you have ever had an opportunity to read this, but if you ever have the opportunity, let me suggest that you don't bother to read it. And the reason that you shouldn't read it is because it's so convincing. It really is. It is a totally evil document. It will tell you that, according to this, that the Jews are going to gain control of the gold of the world. The Jews are going to gain control of the educational system and dumb down the people who are not Jewish. They refer to them in this document as the Goyim. And that they are going to take over the entertainment. They're going to destroy the morality of the people. And they are going to begin working towards this world socialist government. They're going to work within the Masons. It's a very, very convincing document because you'll see a lot of truth in it. The trouble is that it wasn't written by the learned elders of Zion. There are a number of books that go into this, and I recommend them to you if you're interested in documenting what I'm about to say. A book by Norman Cohn, Warrant for Genocide, and a series of books by James Webb, The Occult Conspiracy, The Occult Hierarchy, The Occult Underground, point out that the protocols were written by somebody associated with an organization known as Theosophy and smuggled into Russia, where they were translated into Russian. They were originally written in French, translated into Russian, and then, of course, circulated in Russia leading up to the pogroms. After the Russian Revolution, they went into Germany, and they became the basis of convincing many Germans that it was the Jews that were behind everything wrong in the world, which, of course, gave Adolf Hitler's anti-Semitic policies and the Holocaust a great deal of justification. But one of the more interesting parts of the protocols, the story of the protocol, centers around a man named Colonel Edward Mandell House. And I talked to you about him a little earlier, and I showed you the letter that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had written to him in November of 1933. Actually, when I went through Colonel House's papers at Yale back in 1980, on several occasions, I came across this. This is the protocols of the meetings of the Zionist men of wisdom. It is, for all intents and purposes, a copy of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, but it's different than any other translation because the wording is different, although the ideas are the same, the paragraphs are the same, the wording is different. It is a different translation than any that I know that's available in the West. And so where did it come from? I mean, the original one was in French, and of course then it went into Russian, translated into Russian, translated into English by a man named Victor Marsden, and circulated in America. And that is not this translation. This is a different translation. Now, Colonel House was very active in 1905 when this first went into Russia. Why did Colonel House leave this in his papers, knowing that someone in the future would find it and would comment on it? I've read a great deal about Colonel House. I've never once seen any mention of the fact that he left a copy of the protocols. He wrote a book in 1911. It was called Philip Drew Administrator. In that book, he laid out the plan for the establishment of a dictatorship in America using many of the ideas from the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. He wrote the book anonymously, and one of the things that he did was to leave a clue so that people would be able to figure out who wrote the book. But he would never admit that he was the author, at least until about 1920 or 21. He said, let's have a meeting at Mandell House. Well, his name was Edward Mandell House, so it was pretty clear who was actually had written the book. But he liked to do things like this. Colonel House had some very, very strange powers. He controlled the President of the United States. And people at that time were always curious, how was he able to control the President of the United States? A fascinating book, My First 83 Years in America, was written by Ambassador Gerard, who was the American ambassador to Germany during the Second World War. During the First World War. And Ambassador Gerard tells us that by 1915 the Germans wanted to end the war. You remember it started in 14 and went to 1918. But by 1915 the Germans, February 1915, they wanted to get this war over with. And of course it was accomplishing nothing. And so he was approached. He wrote to President Wilson and said, now's the time to enter negotiations. We can be the intermediary. We can bring peace, stop the war. And he doesn't get a letter back from the president. He gets a letter back from Colonel House that says, it's not time to stop the war. The British don't want to stop the war. And furthermore, all future correspondence between you and the president will come through me. And Ambassador Gerard writes in his book, I mean, where did this guy come up? Where did he come from? He was never elected. He was never appointed by the Senate. He has no standing at all. And yet he directs me that I can't contact the president who appointed me. I have to go through him. Colonel House and some of the books written at that time would go into a room and talk to people, and he'd maybe fix somebody and he'd begin talking to them, and after he had left, an idea would come into their mind, and that idea they'd think would be their own, and they'd begin acting on it, never realizing that it was Colonel House's idea. And the man who commented that.
We'll be right back after this message. The April gift offer is a double DVD set. First, in Genesis Secrets and the End Times, C.K. Quarterman covers what Elohim will do next. Ancient high technology, firmament and the sea of glass, sons of God and the Nephilim, Noah's genetic code, stargates, and the Tower of Babel. Then, in Fallen Angels, Giants, UFOs, and Prophecy, his topics are End Times and Noah, Gap Creationism, Sons of God Mating Today, Giants, again, Unseen Elite Controllers, Genetics of the Antichrist, Origins of Demons, UFOs, Genesis to Revelation, and the New World Order Plan. It's a double DVD package valued at $60 for a gift of just $45 at prophecyclub.com. Just spell prophecy with a C. It's the April gift offer at prophecyclub.com. Okay, you want a deal? Well, I've got a deal for you. Got 4 DVDs valued at $120 for a gift of just $40. First, you get Bill Sneblin's Mind Control Gun Confiscation, and he explains how the federal government mind control programs like Monarch can force a person to do anything they want, including shooting innocent children. Bill ties the start of these programs to the start of mass killings and leaves little doubt that this is the work of evil in high places with plans to confiscate our weapons. Dr. Stephen Houston talks about the rise of the beast, the 10 European families that could become the 10 toes of Daniel's statue, the Vatican and Jesuit order, the occult and Pope John II's funeral, St. Hildegard's prophecy, 3 world wars, the link between the Catholic Church and Freemasonry. Then 2 DVDs from Stan Monteith. First, his famous Secrets of the Illuminati, where he exposes the evil elite that rule the world. And second, in Planned Population Reduction, he exposes the dangers of Vioxx, artificial fertilizers, pesticides, injections, immunizations, vaccinations, genetically altered seeds, cell phones, diet drinks, soy products, mercury preservatives, MSG, aspartame, fluoridated water, suppressed cures, chemtrails, anthrax, cancer treatments, DDT, created diseases, milk additives and processes, MTBE, Splenda, and that's just a few of them. 4 DVDs valued at $120 for a gift of just $40, and if you order before April 1st, you get free shipping. prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. Order the Spring Gift Offer. The Spring Gift Offer. prophecyclub.com. And now, back to the program.
One of the more interesting things about Colonel House is his diary. And the reason I went to Yale is because I wanted to read his diary. And I had read all of the summaries of the diary, 4 volumes. I have the Intimate Papers of Colonel House, written by Charles Seymour. But I was reading things that other people had written that had come from the diary that weren't included in what was available at that time for the diary in 1980. And so I went to Yale University and found out that the diary had been given to Yale in 1923. It had been covered a period from about, perhaps 1911 to 1923 on almost a daily basis. Colonel House kept this diary, and then he had a proviso that it would not be available for public scrutiny until 50 years had passed. So that was 1973. 1923, 1973 would be available. Immediately it was bought up by Times Mirror Company and copyrighted so it could be published, and then never published. And to this very day, it's never been published. When I was there in 1923, they allowed me to copy it because they were sure that it was going to be available, and printed at any time. Although they were going to put it on microfiche, and I don't know how many books you've ever read on microfiche, which is little transparencies you flash up on a screen. But one of the fascinating stories that they told, and Colonel House writes this, he said, I had lunch with Clemenceau. Now, Clemenceau was the Prime Minister of France. And this is about 1919 when they're working on the Treaty of Versailles. And Clemenceau was very worried about the communist revolution because the communists were saying, we are going to destroy the West, we're going to get revolutions in Europe, and we're going to overthrow capitalism. The communist leaders were saying this, Lenin was saying that. And so Clemenceau was saying, we better put these communists down before something happens. But Colonel House said and wrote, but I was able to convince Clemenceau that nothing could be done to put down the communists militarily. And then I had lunch with Orlando. He was the Prime Minister of Italy. And he had the same views. He wanted to do something about communism. I was able to convince him that we could do nothing about communism. And then he writes, I knew what I told them wasn't true. I knew with a small mercenary unit and a few battalions of artillery we could put down the communists, but I didn't want Clemenceau and Orlando to know that. Now, why would this man who was not a communist want communism to survive? It really, in many ways, doesn't make sense. And how was he able actually to convince these leaders of the world of something that wasn't true and that he knew wasn't true? How was he able to control both Woodrow Wilson, who said I would never make a decision without the advice of my good friend Colonel House, and President Roosevelt? How was he able to do it? Well, let's go to a fascinating book written by my friend Ed Griffin. And the reason I put this up here is because it has some sections in it from a book entitled British Agent, written by Bruce Lockhart. Bruce Lockhart had been sent to Russia after the Russian Revolution by a man named Lord Alfred Milner. Now, remember I told you earlier that Cecil Rhodes had left his vast fortune he'd accumulated by taking control of the diamonds and the gold mines of South Africa, and leaving it for a purpose, 2 purposes. One, a secret society, and the other for the Rhodes Scholarships, the Rhodes Trust. Upon Cecil Rhodes' death in 1902, control of the Rhodes Trust was taken over by a man named Lord Alfred Milner, who by 1917, 1918 was the most powerful man in England, but always working behind the scenes, never elected to office, but the man who really controlled what was going on. And he sent Bruce Lockhart, Lord Alfred Milner sent Bruce Lockhart to Russia to work with the communists who had just taken control. And, of course, Lockhart writes that one of the strange things, he could never understand why it was that Lenin, the dictator of Russia, seemed to be so subservient and almost condescending, going along with anything that was suggested to him by American capitalists who were there. In fact, many of these seem to be related to the American Federal Reserve System. And he never understood why such things were going on. It didn't seem right that Lenin, the communist, would be so concerned working with the capitalists. And, of course, there are a number of other books that were written at that time. One of them is the autobiography of Sir George Buchanan. Sir George Buchanan was the English ambassador to St. Petersburg, to Russia, at the time of the Communist Revolution. And in his biography, he has about 10 pages talking about these foolish people who were saying that the English had financed the Russian Revolution. And, of course, he poo-poos the idea. But as you read what he has to say, you begin saying, well, gee, the French thought it happened, and this one and that one. And there's a great deal of evidence out there that the British were involved in financing the Russian Revolution to overthrow their ally in the First World War, which really didn't make sense because, of course, if Russia got out of the First World War, it would release the German troops from fighting on the Eastern Front so they could come to the West and kill more Britishers. But a lot of things in this whole story really don't make sense. The second book we list is Tsarism and Revolution, written by a Russian general who claims that Lord Milner was responsible for the Russian Revolution, the first revolution when Kerensky came to power. Then, of course, one of the most fascinating books is the bottom one, General Wrangel's Memoirs. And, of course, General Wrangel was the commander of the Army of the South, a white Russian army that was opposing the communists. And, of course, the Russian people did not want communism. They didn't want this kind of ruthless government that they saw even being enforced in St. Petersburg and other areas that the communists controlled. And so the Russian people were solidly behind General Wrangel, and he was winning battle after battle after battle. And he made one great tactical error, the same error that General Chiang Kai-shek was to make some years later. General Chiang Kai-shek became dependent upon America. General Wrangel became dependent upon the British for his supplies. And of course, he writes in his memoirs that, first of all, he buys airplanes. He's able to collect taxes from the people in the area he occupies, and he buys airplanes. And what do the English do? But they sabotage his airplanes. And then they come to him and they say, you will withdraw or we'll cut off all of your ammunition and supplies, and all of your men will be killed because they'll have nothing to fight with. And so eventually he's forced to simply retreat because they cut off his munitions and war supplies. And he never understands why the British were so intent upon the defeat of the opposition to the communists. But then, of course, General Wrangel never understood that the most influential man in England at that time was Lord Alfred Milner, who had taken over the leadership of the Rhodes movement upon Rhodes' death in 1902. Well, then, who does really control the Jewish banks of the world? Well, we could take Lazard Brothers in Great Britain. Certainly a very Jewish-sounding name, and yet for many, many years the CEO of Lazard Brothers was a Lord Brand. Name doesn't mean much to you, but remember I told you about Lord Alfred Milner, who had taken control of the Round Table Group, the front for Cecil Rhodes' secret society. Well, upon Milner's death, leadership of the Round Table Group, which was the front for that secret society, was taken over by Lord Brand, who actually led the Round Table up until the 1960s. We have here in the United States Lazard Brothers, certainly a very Jewish-sounding bank, and yet, Lehman Brothers here in the United States, and yet for many years, Lehman Brothers was headed by a Greek named Pete Peterson, who just happened to be the director of the Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, the Goldman Sachs here in the United States, Goldman Sachs right at the present time has 5 Rhodes Scholars in key positions in banking. So much of what you have heard about the Jewish influence in banking really is not so. Now, there are many, many people, of course, who will try to convince you that the real culprit is the Catholic Church, specifically the Jesuits. And they will suggest that the Jesuits operate as a secret society, and it is the Jesuits' influence in South America that has led to the liberation theology and many of the revolutions there. And they're firmly convinced the Catholics are behind everything going on, or if not the Catholics as a whole, then the Knights of Malta, which is a rather secretive group made up of Catholic males. On the other hand, many of the Catholics will tell you that the real force behind what's going on in the world today are the Protestants, specifically a secret Protestant organization known as the Masons. And of course, there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that this is actually correct, because you will find, for instance, that most of America's founding fathers were Masons. The majority of the men who signed the Constitution were members of the craft. Washington, D.C. was laid out in a Masonic pattern, and those of you who've seen Bill Schneblin's videos will actually see pictures of Washington, D.C. and find out the street pattern is laid out in Masonic symbology. Every major building in Washington, D.C. has a Masonic plaque on it. But the most significant thing is that Freemasons control the United States Supreme Court. from 1941 to 1971. And during that period of time, they took God out of our schools. Because, you see, the Masons worshiped the great architect of the universe, the God of the Buddhist, the Brahmin, the Hindu, the Mohammedan, the Shintoite, the God of the whole world, but not the God of the Bible, because the God of the Bible is not the God of the Mohammedan and of the Hindu and of the Buddhist. And so what most people do not understand is that between 1941 and 1971, the Masons controlled the United States Supreme Court, began to centralize all power of Washington, D.C., undermining the very fabric of our constitutional concept of limiting the power of the federal government. 4 of the 6 Supreme Court justices who voted to take God out of our schools were Masons. That was Tom Clark, William O. Douglas, Earl Warren, and Black. In other words, the Masons were responsible for taking God out of our schools, and they did it intentionally because they've always wanted to create a wall of separation between church and state. And I suggest that probably most of you have never heard that. It's never mentioned by conservative organizations across America, and you might ask yourself why that would be. Now, if you talk to Masons, they will point to the symbol on the back of the dollar bill, and they will tell you that is a Masonic symbol. And, of course, they will use this in many of their publications, and they claim that this pyramid capped by the all-seeing eye is indeed a Masonic symbol. Now, I've never met a Mason I didn't like, so how do you explain what they are doing? Well, let me tell you what Manly P. Hall has said. Now, Manly P. Hall, you remember we started our program this evening talking about Manly P. Hall, the most distinguished and important Masonic philosopher of modern times. And in his book, The Lectures on Ancient Philosophy, written in 1929, he said this: Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect. It's necessary to establish the existence of these 2 separate yet independent orders, the one visible, the other invisible. The visible society is a splendid camaraderie of free and accepted men enjoined to devote themselves to ethical, educational, fraternal, patriotic, and humanitarian concerns. But the invisible society is a secret and most august fraternity, whose members are dedicated to the service of the mysterious arcandrum.
Time has run out, but I want to say thank you for listening, and thank you for your prayers and your gifts of support. God bless. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. The April gift offer is a double DVD set. First, in Genesis Secrets and the End Times, C.K. Quarterman covers what Elohim will do next. Ancient high technology, firmament and the sea of glass, sons of God and the Nephilim, Noah's genetic code, stargates, and the Tower of Babel. Then, in Fallen Angels, Giants, UFOs, and Prophecy, his topics are End Times and Noah, Gap Creationism, Sons of God Mating Today, Giants, again, Unseen Elite Controllers, Genetics of the Antichrist, Origins of Demons, UFOs, Genesis to Revelation, and the New World Order Plan. It's a double DVD package valued at $60 for a gift of just $45 at prophecyclub.com. Just spell prophecy with a C. It's the April gift offer at prophecyclub.com. The new Lindsey Williams gift offer is the 4-year financial breakdown, 3 DVDs, and the topics are Agendas of the Elite, Food and Water Supply, Signs to Help You Make Decisions, $40 billion, Chickens Coming Home to Roost, the Middle East, The Life and Death of the Dollar, The Plan for Iran, Greece and America, and Frankenstorm. Then, in Prepare for the Financial Breakdown, the topics are Devise Your Own Freedom, Getting Out of the Rut, The Currency of Your Choice, Design Your Own Method, Freedom at Last from Slavery, The Right to Succeed, Think for Yourself, There Is Another Way. That's 5 DVDs, a gift of $89, not available online. You must call 785-266-1112 to get this offer. That's 785-266-1112. Not available online. 785-266-1112. Ask for the 4-year financial breakdown gift offer.